Can everyone hear me okay? Got the mic going. And on that introduction, it is a little bit old. I think we've been married 47 years now. And I think it's probably more important as my son is a nurse at Stormont Vale. And once every 2 weeks, he works on the COVID unit. He's been having to do that for over a year now. And it's an awful disease. I got my booster Wednesday and no troubles, just a little bit of a sore arm, and it would really help him and everyone else if we took care of this. But anyway, I'm here to talk about another doctor, Dr. Romulus Brinkley. And it's quite a story, and I hope some of you, are familiar with him, but there's a nice picture of Dr. Brinkley. And one thing I'll say is a good friend of mine in Stormont Vale, their daughter worked at the Kansas History Museum out on 6th Street there. And they would every now and then have a costume party where you came as a Kansas character. And she said every time they did this, there were about 4 or 5 Dr. Brinkleys showed up. It's pretty easy. You just have, the nice suit, the goatee and the glasses. So anyway, let's learn about Dr. Brinkley. His dad was a mountain doctor, no formal training. He just read and kind of practiced what to do out there. This was way back in the early 19th century. His mother died when he was 4. His dad died when he was 5, and he was raised by an Aunt Sally. And in school, I like this. You can read these kind of biographies, and there's just certain people that we almost know nothing about him as a child. But here will be these little comments that, yeah, he displayed a real sharp intellect as a child in school. And then after a series of jobs and adventures, he enrolled in the Benedict Medical College in Chicago. And I have this little phrase up there, a series of jobs and adventures, that covers about a 15-year period where he was arrested for fraud 3 or 4 times. He was arrested for bigamy, and he was quite a little character out there. He worked for a medicine man doing that. Another thing he commonly did was he would go into a small town and say, I'm the new doctor, and he'd rent a place, I'm gonna set up my practice here, and then he'd go to the general store and buy all these supplies and clothes and everything else and just put it on credit. I'm the doctor here in town, and then he'd leave that night, go sell the merchandise. So that was a common trick of his. And he started school at this Benedict Medical College in Chicago, and then he claims he finished his coursework in medicine at the Eclectic Medical University in Kansas City. And both these schools were $500 diploma mills. And what's a diploma mill? I've got a little, and I'm going to be using this. It's a little punch cartoon. Boy, it's kind of hard to read that, but this will say, therapy training, 15 minutes, $5. Surgery training or chemistry training, I think it's 15 minutes or 10 minutes and $2.50. And then up here, surgery training, it's a 2-minute course and 25 cents. But you go through here and they crank out the doctors come out, they've got saws, going to saw people's legs out, large syringes, they really haven't had any medical training. Here's the owner of the medical school sitting by all the graves of the patients of his graduates out there. So there were all these medical schools, and I think I have, in Chicago from 1890 to 1905, that 15-year period, 20 brand new medical schools opened in Chicago area. And I think around 1900 to 1905, we had 3 medical schools in Topeka, downtown Topeka on Kansas Avenue. So it was just something that was out there, and it was real easy, and none of these were the real, training medical school like we have nowadays. Well, and I do want to talk for a little bit, about medical training out there. I did work in the hospital, Stormont, for 31 years, and 10 years before that, I worked in healthcare. The first kind of physician training there is the allopathic physician. These are MDs. This is kind of our standard mainstream, physicians, based on, scientific experiment out there. Then we have the osteopaths. Folks on preventive medicine, minimal use of drugs, and they are a DO, and you can see that a lot. If you go to a doctor's office, you'll see MDs and DOs. And I will say a little bit of history that 70 years ago, there was a pretty significant difference between an MD and a DO. That the training of the DO wasn't anywhere near as complete or thorough as MDs had. That all started changing in the late 50s and early 60s, and by now they're pretty comparable. I know when I left Stormont Vale, the Cotton Mill Clinic, I think we had about 230 doctors. I think 60 or 70 of them were DOs, and it's just MD or DO. It doesn't matter anymore. Where back, in the 50s, it did, but no more. So then, we have chiropractic medicine, and that's kind of manipulations, to correct things. Now we get a little bit more on the edge, or, non-traditional medicine. Homeopathic medicine is kind of based on the idea that if, your body can heal itself. If you have a little substance, you can heal something. It's almost like the vaccines, our COVID vaccines are a little different, but like the flu shot I also got on Wednesday, it's little dead flu viruses. So I'm getting a little bit of flu in me, and that'll help me build up the immunities to that. That's kind of the thinking on homeopathic medicine. And that's the eclectic that, Brinkley ended up in claiming he got a degree in, is herbal medicines, a lot of physical therapy, also some principles of homeopathic medicine. Just, a little bit of anything kind of goes with the eclectic medicine. So anyway, here's a picture of Dr. Brinkley, and then that's his wife, Minnie, who's, his partner crying this whole time. Well, Brinkley, he was in Kansas City finishing up his schooling apparently at the Eclectic Medical School, working as a physician for a meatpacking plant. And he saw an ad in the paper that this town of Milford, 20 or 2,000 people, had just lost their doctor and they needed a doctor. And he wasn't very pleased with what he was doing at the factory or the meatpacking plant, being a physician there. So he and Millie packed up their car and they drove to Milford. And I think I have in the references at the end here, there is a little KTWU 40-minute video, and it's an interview with Millie Brinkley. And she says on that, we drove to Milford, and the ad said 2,000, the town of 2,000 people. We showed up, and it was maybe 200 people if you counted the cats and the people in the cemetery. She said, but we were out of money, we were out of gasoline, so we stayed there and set up a practice. So he set up his practice there, and he arrives in October. And actually, then we had that swine flu pandemic that, we all are kind of comparing this current one with that one. He's got a fairly good reputation for taking care of the patients back then, and helping out with all this. But now here it all starts. He had this 46-year-old farmer, Bill Stitsworth, says, Doc, I've got no pep, I'm a flat tire. I wish I could perform like a billy goat. And the light went off, and the stories are, it's kind of conflicting. Stitsworth said, well, Dr. Brinkley, well, maybe we can do something about that. How about transplanting, some goat testicles into you so you can really have part of a billy goat in you. Brinkley said it was Stitsworth who pushed him into it. You need to do this. Come on, let's do this. Let's see what will happen. So, who's taking credit for this or who's taking blame, is never really settled. And we think of this as, that's just crazy. That's just nuts. We got to realize this is like 1918, and there was a lot of work being done with animal organs back then. Putting them in people, especially in Europe. This was a pretty big area of research, experimentation. And in the United States, we were doing some of it. A lot of it in the United States, we were grinding up organs and injecting them into people, animal organs, to see how, what that would do. So this idea of animal organs in people wasn't that far-fetched back then, but it's still, kind of a far-fetched thing. Well, he does the surgery on the Stitsworth, and you can see the headlines there. First goat plant baby, bless his son. Or I am rejuvenated, cries the goat plant patient. Look at me. And then here's another headline, Kansas man of 46 gets goat land, now he's a happy father. So success, here's the first thing. And Brinkley, we kind of know his history now. He's going to take advantage of this. So with the apparent success, he opens up a big 16-room clinic in Medford called the Institute of Health. He starts claiming other things, not only, impotence, but, here's 27 other cures, these goat glands, including the size of the prostate. And he also claims I have a 95% success rate on this. I go back to where, he, again, has displayed the sharp intellect. What he does on his success rate, there were two main things he did, I think, helped him achieve this rate, apparently. One is when the men showed up, the patients showed up, Brinkley or his staff would have the men choose the goat they wanted. So here, I want that goat. So it could be then, if the operation wasn't a success, well, it's the goat, he chose the goat, but, and then the other thing, which was probably even a more successful tactic, was he had it with the staff, or, kind of trained his staff to kind of mention off to the side, or matter of factly, or to someone else that, we keep finding the more of these surgeries we do, keep finding that the more intelligent the person is, the greater the success rate. So what this is well, it was an unsuccessful surgery. I'm basically admitting I'm stupid, So, that was I thought a pretty clever little tactic that, the smarter you are, the more successful this is going to be. So he starts advertising, the business booms. They had to redo the railroad into Milford. So many people started showing up. Milford thrives. He's got all this business. He builds even a bigger, newer hospital. He put sidewalks in, especially from the railroad station to his hospital. He put in a new water system, a new post office, and of course he sponsored the Milford baseball team, and they were called the Brinkley Goats. When you think about advertising, this crazy advertising you can see here is, electric treatment to get rid of fat, or here's a soap that'll get rid of fat. Cancer can be cured, social tragedy, these are women's issues that, you can take care of with this vegetable compound. So there was a lot of quackery out back then. Again, this is the 19-teens, and it was just a kind of Wild West. There wasn't anything very well regulated on this. So Brinkley fit right in with all this and was very successful. And here's a little cartoon. I don't know if you can read it, but that dang Brinkley cost me $750. And the goat says, yeah, well, what do you think it cost me? And back then, to put this in perspective, his surgeries did cost $750, and you could buy a brand new Model T for $500. So he was making a lot of money and doing very well. Here's the first Brinkley Hospital in Milford. It's not a very good picture, but that's the best I could come up with. And then here is Tokenberg goats. These were a Swiss dairy goat, kind of medium sized. And I think one of the big advantages of why Brinkley might have picked them is they didn't smell. Some animals have these smells, but the goats didn't smell. So, that actually is the house back there. And then here are the goats. Like I said, the patients got to pick the goat they wanted. Then he builds a 2-story, or actually almost a 3-story brick hospital, Brinkley Sanitary and Hospital. I never could find an actual photograph of it. Okay, so this is Brinkley's all set and thriving in Milford, Kansas. Like I said, quackery is just kind of running rampant in the United States at this time. Our healthcare system isn't very well licensed or credentialed or accredited at this point. But we do have a Dr. Morris Fishbein. And, he went to the University of Chicago, very well-respected school. He went to Rush Medical College, which was just a very, standard medical school and a very prestigious one. He was editor of JAMA, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is the large physician group in the United States. And he kind of got a reputation for exposing quacks. Here's a book Dr. Fishbein did. Facts and quackery and healing. All right, so Brinkley's become pretty darn famous. And Harry Chandler, who owned the New York Times, the big newspaper in Los Angeles, invited Brinkley out to put goat glands in one of his editors. And I see that and I'm thinking, I've never had a boss like that. It's just that, you have your job descriptions, and we always joke about the last job description. There's always other duties as assigned, but nothing ever like that. Well, anyway, so Brinkley goes out there, and it's kind of this big publicity thing with Harry Chandler in the Los Angeles Times. Well, the operation was deemed a success, and you know why these operations are successful. And it was the Chamber of Commerce, it was actually the Chamber of Commerce of Pasadena, said, we'll build you a $100,000 hospital. Come out here and set up your practice here. And Brinkley said, well, this is great. This is exactly what I'm going to do. Well, the AMA and Fishbein jumped in and said, we can't let this happen. This guy can't go to Southern California and, you know, spread this dope gland shenanigans out there. And they prevented him from getting a license. The big thing they did was Brinkley could never produce a medical school diploma or, you know, some kind of a proof that he graduated from medical school. Here was the Bennett College and that Bennett Medical School in Chicago and then the eclectic one in Kansas City. Either one of them had records of him graduating, and in fact, both of them said he still owes us tuition money. So anyway, Brinkley's a setback. So he goes back to Medford, but he had a brilliant idea. While he was in Los Angeles, Harry Chandler, you know, he's the Los Angeles Times, you know, big newspapers, big media source out there. But this was 1922 Los Angeles. He was setting up the first radio station in California. So what does Brinkley do? He comes back and sets up a radio station. Radio station KFKB, which is I moved up there. Hit the wrong, but it's Kansas First, Kansas Best, the Sunshine Station in the heart of the nation. And one thing I want to point out, you know, here's a picture of Dr. Brinkley. Here's his home. And here are these two radio towers. And between them are these, you know, 4 parallel wires up there, and it says KFKB on them. This is how radio was transmitted back then. It needed the 2 towers and that, you know, those wires in between. That's how it wasn't just a single tower that broadcast out. These were the original radio towers. I don't know how often or anyone ever been on the K-State campus. They still have 2 towers from the original K-State radio station, or they left on campus there. Kind of a remembrance of that. So here's actually a picture, I'm going to use my cursor again, of Medford, Kansas. Here's one tower, and you can kind of see a bit of another tower over here, and it really doesn't show up well, but those 4 parallel wires are there. So this is how Brinkley broadcast. I think these were 100-foot towers, and that he broadcast with. So he got a license, you know, within a year of coming back from Los Angeles, and it's 5,000 watts. And remember that number, 5,000 watts. He became very popular because of his entertainment format. He'd have military bands playing from Fort Riley. He'd have gospel quartets there. He also, one big thing he did was he had classes from K-State that we broadcast on the radio. So here was this thing, you know, where farmers in Kansas could be taking French classes, you know, which was pretty impressive. But the big thing he had on there was country music, and he had a Roy Faulkner, was this country singer, and he was called the Lonesome Cowboy, and he became one of Brinkley's most popular features on the show. And Brinkley also would read scriptures and talk, which I think I have here. You know, that in addition to the entertainment, you know, he read scripture and told stories of his youth, you know, about what you know, difficult childhood he overcame. And of course, the whole show would have a lot of business on his surgeries out that he would do. And then in 1925, his radio station had been going for a few years. Here was the Scopes trial, and that was where John Scopes, the high school teacher who taught evolution, was tried for teaching evolution in the state of Tennessee. And this was broadcast nationally. It was just a phenomenon. And with this Brinkley, you know, all of a sudden I'm becoming a much more fundamentalist Christian, because you can see how popular that was in the nation at that time. And then in 1928, he did another little thing. He opened up on his radio station what he called the Medical Question Box and the Brinkley Pharmacy Association. And I will touch on those in just a second. But here's another little thing in the paper, you know, preaches fundamentalism, practices go applied science. All right, now here's a picture of a drugstore, and it said Brinkley prescriptions filled here. So what Brinkley did was this medical question box. he'd tell people, if you have medical issues, write them in a letter and send them in to me and I'll answer them on the air. So he'd get thousands of letters. He'd have someone go through them and give him 3 or 4 that he would answer every day. So he'd get on the radio and say, okay, here's Tom from Wichita, and his problems are, he's having some abdominal pain, and there's some discoloration in his urine or whatever, so well, it could be he might have kidney stones, as Dr. Brinkley taught him. What he needs to do is he needs to go to the Brinkley pharmacy and get prescription number 64 and take that, every or 3 times a day for 2 weeks. And then you also want to go and get prescription 12 and take that once a day for at least 3 months. And this should help your problems there. Well, so Tom from Wichita does this. Prescriptions cost $3. Brinkley got $1 out of every 3. Now the thing is, it wasn't just Tom from Wichita buying those prescriptions. Well, I've got those same kind of, symptoms or whatever. So lots of people would go and buy these prescriptions. And it was working out at its peak. He was getting $14,000 a week, with that $1 prescription that he would get out of that. In today's money, that $14,000 a week ends up $6.5 million. So this was quite a racket he had going, his medical question box and his prescription pharmacies. Well, and that's actually what crossed the line. So Fishbein, now this is ridiculous, and he just keeps pestering the radio, Federal Radio Commission, which kind of regulated these things, that this is not in the public interest. So they started holding hearings on this. This kind of opens up a little bit more. Brinkley's under the microscope by people, and now the Kansas Board of Medical Examiners is looking into his practice, and he wasn't able to move to California because he really didn't have a valid license, and they're looking into this now. So while the hearings were going on in the radio commission, Brinkley, once they started, he saw what was going to happen. He said, I'll take the medical question box off the air, just let me keep my radio station. Well, they canceled his broadcast license on June 13th, 1930. And then the medical board revoked his license about a month later. So here he's lost his radio station, he's lost his medical license. What does Brinkley do? What's this guy do? Well, remember, he's got a sharp intellect. He runs for governor. Let's pasture the goats in the State House lawn. And this is it's a little bronze statue about 3 or 4 inches tall of a goat. And it says, for governor under it. And they have this at the History Museum on West 6th Street. So Brinkley runs for a governor. And his campaign will change how campaigning is done. He's got his truck, the Brinkley Heavy Artillery or ammunition train, Dr. J.R. Brinkley, and it's filled with a big sound system, a portable stage, which he would use to, go out and have his campaigns. If things worked out properly, he would have the truck set up this stage and the speaker system out in the field, and he would come in on a plane once owned by Charles Lindbergh. It wasn't the Spirit of St. Louis, but it was a Lindbergh plane. He would fly around the area and then land, where the crowd was. This is quite an impressive entrance out there. Then you can see his, temporary stage and sound system out there. And so what would happen on these campaign visits, well, the first thing he'd do is have the Lonesome Cowboy, Roy Faulkner, sing a little bit. Then he might have some championship fiddler do some songs or have a yodeling contest, things like that. And then at one point, after all this entertainment, this minister would come out to the prayer and introduce Dr. Brinkley. Dr. Brinkley would come out, promise every county was going to have a lake, and every school kid would have free textbooks. This was his campaign promise. Now, what happened was Brinkley had to be a write-in candidate. By the time all this, it was July that his medical license was revoked, and the elections are in November. He filled out an application. I want to be a write-in candidate. Apparently, you fill out some form and you sign it. And I'll step back for a second. When I first read or learned about Dr. Brinkley, it was at least 15 or so years ago. And like, you know, I worked at Strong AiL for many years, and they had the merger with the Cotton O'Neill Clinic. When that happened, I had a lot of dealings with Dr. Bob O'Neill, one of the, the founder of the Cotton O'Neill Clinic, and he was born in 1920. So I'm reading all this stuff about Brinkley, and Dr. O'Neill's about the oldest person I know. So I asked him, well, did you listen to Brinkley on the radio? He said, no, I understand it was pretty graphic or explicit. And, my parents wouldn't let me listen to it on the radio. But then what Dr. O'Neill said, the thing I remember about Dr. Brinkley is my daddy and all his friends were scared to death he was going to be elected governor. Well, Dr. O'Neill's dad was the Chief Justice of the Kansas Supreme Court. And what happened was, Brinkley, when he signed his application to be a write-in candidate, he wrote the name J.R. Brinkley is how he signed it. Well, the Attorney General, like 3 or 5 days before the election, ruled that the only write-in ballots that we're going to count are the ones that say J.R. Brinkley, like he wrote out on the application. And surprisingly, the Kansas Supreme Court upheld this decision right away. So what the Brinkley people did, his radio station was still functioning, it was on, appeal or whatever. So they started this huge campaign saying, you got to put J.R. Brinkley on the ballot. J.R. Brinkley. And they made all these little pencils to take to the voting booth that said J.R. Brinkley. This is how you have to do it. So it took 12 days to count all the ballots. An estimated 30 to 50,000 were tossed out because they said Doc Brinkley or it wasn't the J.R. Brinkley. So a huge number of ballots were tossed out. The final tally, well, you can see it here. The Democrat Woodring won 216 votes. House had 214. Brinkley 180, almost 187,000. So we had that 30,000. It would be a very close election. If you had 50,000, it easily would have won. So it was, Brinkley, in some ways, got gypped out of the election. So, okay, so here we go again. Lost his radio station, lost his license, lost his race for governor. What does he do next? He opens up the first border blast for a radio station in Mexico. And what this is you just get across the Rio Grande and you don't have any United States rules or regulations on anything. You can just broadcast into the United States. It was a radio station, XER, the Sunshine Station between the nations, where KFKB was the Sunshine Station in the heart of the nation. And here's a picture of it. It was located right across from Del Rio, Texas. If you know your geography, here's the Big Bend of Texas, and then the Rio Grande kind of comes up again. So this is the furthest north of the Rio Grande, so it's the deepest into, North America, in the United States that Mexico goes. So he's right across the river there, broadcast into the United States. We did have 2 towers that were 100 feet tall, and then the wires between them. This radio station has 3 towers holding these 2 broadcast wires, and he was broadcasting at 100,000 watts. And if you remember in Kansas, it's 5,000 watts. It's 20 times more powerful. And this radio station just goes all through the central United States, and I think even reaches the coasts at times. It caused havoc. I know the most popular radio station in Chicago was at the same frequency, and when Brinkley was broadcasting, it overran it. So here you are in Chicago, you can't even listen to the local station because this thing down in Mexico is overriding it. And some of the stories were even, this radio is just, and it's kind of pointed this way to head north, that these radio broadcasts are just going across North America. And the stories were that it went over the North Pole and down to the Soviet Union. And this is how the Soviets, a lot of them learned English, was listening to to the radio station. Well, he kept the entertainment format the same. He realized that this was good, and by now, he's so rich and powerful that he hired an agent to go out and find some more country music. I mean, the Lonesome Cowboy is good, but let's find someone else. And actually, what his agent did was he came up with the Carter family. So the Carter family started broadcasting on radio station, XER, the Border Blaster pirate radio station. And here would be these old singers, it's like Willie Nelson or Merle Haggard or Johnny Cash. All of them said the first time they ever heard the Carter family was on the Border Blaster radio station with Dr. Brinkley. So he kind of really gave country Western music to the United States. During all this, Brinkley remained in Medford. He just basically phoned it in, as we sometimes say, and transmitted his programs there. And he was able to have his subordinates keep running the hospital, people who still had their medical license. So his income was coming in that way. And it stayed open, for the next 2 years. And then he decided to run for governor in 32. I'm going to come back and get rid of all these people, put my people in the positions of power and decision making. But the depression was setting in, Outland was popular, so he lost. So what he did was he moved everything down to Del Rio. I think it was sometime in October of 33. He took everything out of value out of his Medford hospital, including the light bulbs, and then he had a wrecking ball just come and level the hospital and moved everything down to Del Rio, Texas. And I have up there, I kind of went from gland transplants to just general prostate cures, but it's still all kind of hokey stuff. The Del Rio years is estimated he was making $12 million a year. This is kind of a tourist postcard. Here's his humble cabin that he grew up in. Here's his big mansion in Del Rio, and here's a yacht. And Del Rio, Texas is a very hot area. And what Brinkley would do is he'd leave every May and get on his yacht, travel around the world, and then come back, end of September. So for a 5-month period, during the heat of summer, he was not in Del Rio. And his yachts were so nice that, and the people he was sailing around with during this time, that he actually sold one of his yachts to the King of England. Here, I needed a new yacht, I'm selling mine, so the King of England bought his yacht. Here's a picture of Dr. Brinkley and Minnie, and then he had one boy out there, Johnny Boy. So now he's starting to expand things. I'm going to open up a hospital in Little Rock, Arkansas. So he does that. And then what starts happening is, like I said, he's gone for a 5-month period. So now he's in Del Rio and Little Rock. And someone moves into Del Rio, Texas, another quack doctor who's going to do the same kind of procedures as Brinkley. And he has people at the train station, meeting these guys coming off the train, saying, go to Brinkley's, it's going to cost you this. To go to our guy, and it'll be $300 less. So they were taking traffic away from Brinkley. And Brinkley, was all upset about this, so he's radioing back to the city fathers in Del Rio, shut this guy down, stop this guy. I'm important to your community and your economy, and they didn't do anything. So in retaliation, Brinkley moved everything from Del Rio to Little Rock, and he bought this, elegant golf course and country club, and that's the new Brinkley Hospital. So you can see we're really moving up from that original large farmhouse in Medford, Kansas, to this, elegant kind of country club hospital. All right, so it's 1938. Brinkley's at the peak of his career and money making. Fishbine is getting more and more powerful too with his business. So he decides to attack. We just got to put this guy out of business. It's ridiculous. So the thinking is that, our criminal laws, I don't want to say doctors can kill people or negligent or whatever. It's hard to convict them of some kind of, criminal crime. So the thinking was we got to get him in the civil court and have him sue us for libel. So Fishbine published a couple of articles in called Medical Charlatans, and it was in a medical magazine that layman's magazine called Hygiena, and he just called Brinkley the biggest quack in the history of the world. You know, all these things, all these people who died because of Brinkley's, you know, malpractice and things like this. He just didn't hold back. He threw everything he could at Brinkley. And Brinkley obliged, said, you know, I'm suing you, and I 250,000 was the maximum he could sue for at that time. So they're going to go to trial. And the question is, well, why would Brinkley sue? You know, he's sitting there making $12 million a year, Del Rio, or now probably Little Rock. Well, he considered himself one of the best known doctors in the world. But he was also getting a lot of lawsuits. Like I said, there were a lot of bad outcomes from Brinkley's stuff. And he figured, well, if I can silence my most powerful critic, all the rest of those lawsuits will go away. And this was also 1938. If you think of your history back then, Hitler's been in power for a while. Brinkley always thinks he has his finger on the pulse of things, that the fundamental Christian, you know, stuff from the Scopes trial. And now what does he have his finger on? He thinks, well, this is an erring against a Jew, you know, in this trial. So I've got that on my side. Right, the trial starts, and it's going to be down in Del Rio, Texas. And I have down there, it was kind of billed free-range crack weed versus medical mainstream, professional mainstream. Numerous victims and supporters testified. There were people who absolutely loved John Brinkley, you know, and swore by him. But then there are also people who were critical, and many family members whose, you know, dads or grandpas died, you know, from Brinkley's procedures. And then Fishbein was on the witness stand for one morning. Basically, he just said, none of this is proven. His prescriptions that we've got just seem to be colored water. There's nothing in them. You know, we can't find any materials in there. And he said, normal medicine, you know, like I had way back at the start, allopathic medicine is based on scientific experiment and growth, that if you find something that's successful and good, you share it with people, and, you know, you want to have as many people, you know, available with this kind of treatment. That's basically all Fishbein said. You know, Brinkley was on the witness stand for 2 days, and he's always been kind of a pretty cool customer and can handle himself under pressure. But I think this 2-day trial got to him a little bit. And what happened was he eventually admitted, you know, okay, these prescriptions, a lot of them were just water with food coloring in them. You know, so that was one big death blow to him. And then the other thing was, you know, early on in his 2 days of testimony, well, what did you do on these goat gland transplants? And he said, well, you know, you put the goat gland in there, and it's a lot of detailed work, you know, getting veins and arteries and nerve endings attached to that so the little organ would survive. And then later on in the afternoon, the second day or something, well, you know, so what happens after, you know, a few weeks or months or something with that goat gland? And Brinkley goes, they probably just dissipate in there, just stick it in there, and it just probably just dissipates, goes away. And well, you said you were attached. Oh, that's right. So he kind of contradicted himself, which, you know, isn't going to help, especially after admitting my prescriptions were fake. So the decision was handed to the jury in March of '39, March 30th. And it took them 5 hours to rule in favor of Fishbein. Fishbein had every right to call him the, you know, the greatest quack in the world. So this was pretty much the end. And it comes very quickly. It's a lot of these people, you know, once the fall starts and you're so high up, it happens in a hurry. You know, being called a fraud, you know, lawsuits really started to come in. The IRS went after him, and the IRS, you know, they're going after Al Capone and Tom Pendergast, or they like going after these rich people, crooks too. You know, and the U.S. Post Office charged him with fraud. He did a lot of his advertising was via the mail, you know, so. And then the United States and Mexico agreed on radio stations and bandwidth, so XERA closed. And in the summer of '41, you know, about 2 years after his unsuccessful defamation trial, he had a heart attack, and then he died a year later at the age of 56. He's buried in Memphis, and he wanted to be buried in Memphis because that's where he met Mitch. And his tombstone says J.R. Brinkley, M.D., which I'm sure Fishbein is just turning over in his grave with that, but somehow that got put on there. The state of North Carolina recognizes John Brinkley. Here's the John Brinkley home. medical maverick, radio and advertising pioneer, candidate for governor, boyhood home across the river. That's pretty much all they say. And here's a little something about Aunt Sally. So they recognize him. The city of Del Rio, his mansion is a tourist attraction. It's a historic site. The one plaque up there has, kind of the whole history of his goat gland transplants and how important he was to the Del Rio economy. And then just the house here too. So they recognize him. The Del Rio High School, they're the Del Rio Rams. There's the Rams, the football team or whatever. They're proud of their history or heritage out there. In Kansas, what do we do? Well, the city of Medford is now under, and it's gone. We have nothing to remember or, officially recognize John Brinkley. But, I've heard that when the water level is at a certain point and the sun angle is at a certain angle, that you can still see the steps of that Brinkley Hospital in the lake there. So anyway, here are the references. Alton Lee was a K-State professor and wrote this book, Bizarre Careers of John Brinkley, which is about 15 or 18 years old out there. This book wrote the book Charlatan. He's a writer for the Rolling Stone magazine. And to kind of tell you the difference between these two books, there'll be some discrepancies on. Probably one of the bigger ones is that radio station, XERA, the pirate radio station. What Alton Lee, the K-State professor, says is, here was this incredibly powerful radio transmission equipment that the United States government bought. They moved it to Iceland, and during World War II, they could communicate with all their ships and submarines in the North Atlantic. The thing was so powerful. The Charlatan book, he said, the radio station was bought by this company, and they put Wolfman Jack there. The radio, disc jockey. So you get these discrepancies. So I guess what I'm kind of implying is if you want to read one, I think this one's a little bit more legitimate. There is a little crazy documentary called Nuts, that Penny Lane did. And then, like I said, there's a Sunflower Journeys episode, or I think it's a YouTube clip where you actually see Penny Brinkley out there. So anyway, that's it for John Brinkley. I guess I told 11:30, so we have a few minutes to answer any questions. Yes.
Just yesterday, was it they did the thing of the transplanted the pig kidney into a human?
I heard that, and
he's ahead of his time.
no, and I will say that the human is brain dead. If you didn't know that, I mean, this person is not ever going to really be alive again. So this is kind of, so that makes it kind of strange. But I do know that there's been a lot of, pigs and humans are pretty similar on some of our genetic makeup. That these pig organs could be a source because we need kidneys and we just don't get that many. Yes.
I think too, they modify the DNA or genetic modification.
Okay. Yeah, and I do know what you're saying, and I haven't read all that much detail about it, but I just kind of got the business that it was a brain dead person receiving it, so it's not, it's still an experiment, but yes.
So was it never an actual transplant? You just
I think at the first he was putting in goat testicles.
so he was literally.
Yeah, he was putting them in, and then there were people getting infections, or you get this foreign body, and and kind of these rejection things we have doing with this. There were a lot of bad outcomes with Brinkley. I mean, they never had a clear number, but that coming out of that Medford hospital where several hundred people were died, getting this transplant, and I think some of the worst things happened later, because you just got this put in, and you get a bad infection or something, here's this foreign body in you. But no, he was putting him in, and then after a while, they were thinking he was just almost like just, here were little, just shavings of a testicle that he would just stick in there or whatever. But you know, he tried to, you know, that was part of when the medical examiners were looking at it and wanted to see this operation. He just kind of covered up and, okay, it's all done, and they never really saw anything. You know, he wasn't showing him. You know, I used to work in surgery, and the doctors are always, you know, well, here's where we sew it here or there, do that. They're always showing the resident or someone, you know, what they're doing. You could see it, but when the medical examiners wanted to see it, he just kind of hit the whole thing once done. So, but at the start, it was, yes.
The people working with, you know, did they ever report it?
I think they're well paid, loyal employees. You know, it's
What became of his wife?
his wife ended up in she stayed in the mansion in Del Rio till I think her death. And I actually heard a radio story in the last year or two about this young man, you know, growing up in Del Rio, and he talked about here's this crazy old lady who lived in this mansion, and he would go visit her and how wonderful she was. But I think that's about the only asset. I think when you go bankrupt, you get to keep your home or something. But they had that home in Del Rio that Minnie stayed in until she died. Like I said, that KTWU thing is a interviewing with, there's visits with her, and she's definitely an elderly woman.
What about the son?
The son, I was just mentioning, little Johnny, ended up, I think he had some alcohol problems, and I think in his early 50s committed suicide. So, yes.
I couldn't quite hear the question earlier, but how much did you remove the original prostate gland before inserting the old gland?
I don't think so. I honestly don't know, but I think he did minimal amount possible. He was just, you know, the quicker it is, the better. So he wasn't doing a prostatectomy. Yes.
Was he actually married to this? Said he had been this before. Was he actually married?
Yeah, he and Minnie were married.
To,
Yes.
so he was.
And that was the thing. I think he married Minnie before he, you know, officially was divorced from his first wife. So, but Minnie was the second part of the bigamy. A nice little thing, a nice little personal story that I'm proud of. So, any other questions? Well, if not, you all know, if nothing else, a little bit more about Dr. Brinkley. So, thank you.